we talk about same sorts of things you just mentioned, Ann, which is the benefits being important to members and to retirees. And we say those things and we believe them, but it's always nice to kind of reaffirm them. So as some of you may know, and maybe even possibly participated, hopefully some of you were surveyed. We did a benefit survey, we actually did two surveys, one that dealt with the retirement side, one that dealt with the health insurance side, just to sort of ask some questions of active members and retirees about how they benefit how much they appreciate, how important their benefits are to them. We, as of yesterday, have posted the full survey on the ERS website. We've kind of buried it back in there because we haven't had a chance to make it completely ADA accessible, and we're working on that. But it's in there under our reports, and you should be able to find it. We'll send y'all a link if you can't find it, Ann. But the full report is in there. Once we've made it completely accessible, we'll have it called out in a newsletter. And on the front page a little bit, but it's there as of yesterday if y'all want to look at. Basically, I think it's what we know, which is 64% of respondents and 76% of the respondents said that their health coverage and their defined benefit plans are a major reason that they're with their agency. Those numbers are kind of lined up there. You can see 64% said their health insurance or health coverage, 76% said their defined benefit plan was a major reason that they remained with their agency or institution. We did on the healthcare side, obviously talked to some of our institutions of higher education that are participating. 85% of respondents said they consider their group benefits a valuable part of their compensation and or retirement package. And 55% of respondents said their defined benefit plan meets their needs. And interestingly enough, new employees, those that are under 30 and retirees over 60, find that those are really important. So what we knew is that young employees still value those benefits. Sometimes we question whether the new employees, the younger folks are valuing the defined benefit plan, but interestingly enough, they really do. Next slide. This is really what I wanted to talk about today, which is the pension fund. And that's what we tried to focus on last session. What our hope and intent is to focus on this legislative session. And I know you're very aware of this, but we're running out of money. And sooner rather than later, and in absence of any action, these dates that you can see here are screaming towards us. The main ERS fund and the LECO fund, which I think we probably are most interested in here today, are set to run out of money in most of our lifetimes in 2061 and 2041. Just to give you a sense of that, though, those numbers are predicated on last bienniums or last fiscal year's actuarial valuation. And so those are looking at our returns, not taking into consideration the returns that we may have this year, and also not taking into consideration the fact that we didn't get funding in the current biennium. So once we do the new valuation, these numbers are going to be updated, and they're going to come probably screaming forward even sooner. Next slide. So, what are some of the factors that have impacted that? Again, things that I know this group is acutely aware of. The contributions, while they've increased substantially, back in 2015, the state substantially increased its contribution. Active employees substantially increased their contribution. They haven't met the actuarially sound rate that we've needed in any of the previous 20 years. We gotten close. 2015 was pretty close, but again, not nearly enough to meet that, pay off that unfunded liability. There have been reforms. You're aware of this as well. In 2009, and then I think it was in 2013, there were benefit design changes. Those were all for new employees that came on after the effective dates of those acts. However, today we've got somewhere close to 60% of our active workforce is in one of these reduced benefit plans. We also our board just did their experience study. That's where they look at, evaluate, and update as necessary any of the assumptions on which all of these calculations are based as to kind of where we are financially. Will we have enough money in the future to pay benefits? There are a lot of assumptions that we have to make to figure that out. And they've updated some of those assumptions, most notably the return assumption. Of course, markets, as you know, are very challenging and very volatile. We have months like we had in March, and then you'll have days in April that were historic positive dates mixed with historic negative dates. And so given that volatility and really the data more than anything, it really tries to be a data-driven decision. The board changed our return assumption to 7%. So expecting that we will get 7% return in the market over the next 30 years. And that's a somewhat of a reduction from the 7.5% assumption that we had previously. So when you're not going to get that money from returns in the market, you're going to have to get it somewhere else. And that either comes from contribution rate increases is where we think is most appropriate. As I said a moment ago, delays in funding just makes this worse. I think we can go to the next slide. We actually have a data point on this there. So in absence of any changes in funding, increasing the funding, the unfunded liability, the debt that we are projecting that we'll have, grows $1 billion per biennium. So again, that's another one of those factors that just causes those depletion dates to move forward when you add another $1 billion in unfunded liability and start anticipating that you're going to have to pay that off. The legislative appropriations request process is almost up on us. As y'all know, it usually kicks off sometime in the summer, kind of wraps up with a due date for your legislative appropriations request sometime late summer, with a hearing usually in early fall. We haven't gotten our LAR drafting instructions yet, but we're already starting to sort of project out where we think we might be. And that's what we've got on this page here, that you can see. This is kind of based on a range of assumptions about what we'll get in the market this year. On the optimistic side, we're hopeful that we could have a 0% return this year. And on the negative side, we're assuming a -3%. We're pretty close to 0 right now. There's still some time left. Who knows what the market will do over the course of the next weeks. But on if we were to have a -3% return this year, our ask would need to be closer to $600 million. If we were to somehow, come in just flat at 0, then it would be closer to the $500 million. I've been talking to legislators a little bit already. I kind of been shooting that in the middle, talking about $550 million, all funds per year. So that's about a $1 billion need this session. And ongoing. Again, it's what's important is that they put together a plan. And this is the other thing that we've talked about, is that we know it's going to be a really tight budget session. But what's really important is that they put together a plan to start paying off this unfunded liability. They don't have to do it all in one swoop. If they want to, that's great. But I think we're realistic in knowing that there are a lot of demands on the budget. But starting to put in a plan like they did for teacher retirement system, where they phase in the contribution rate increases to a point in 2 or 3 or 4 years, they're at the max of where they want to be and what we need. And then we can continue that contribution into the next 30 years and pay off this unfunded liability. So anyway, that's our message, that it can be phased in. And the final slide on this is just a quick note on the group benefits, the health insurance particularly. It's been a good news story for the last 4 or 5 years. We've gone into the last 2 legislative sessions asking for almost nothing. During the last legislative session, we asked for no increase over what we had previously gotten. So we're effectively this biennium operating at 2019 funding levels per our request. Back in 2017, we asked for, I think, a 0.7% increase each year. So less than 1% increase. That's what we asked for. That's what we got. And so the good news is we don't see a need for any increases in funding for healthcare this session. As we move out a little bit further, there's obviously going to be a need. But the good news about that is we think it'll allow us to focus on the pension side only without having to be out there with both hands out asking for both pension funding and healthcare funding. That being said, we know this is going to be an incredibly tight budget session. I've worked at the Capitol in a number of these in 11 and 03 that were very tight budget sessions, and in these kinds of circumstances, they really leave no stone unturned. So it is a distinct possibility that they will come looking to reduce funding for our healthcare plan, which would mean that 2019 funding level that we would be existing on would be scaled back to something less. If that's the case, we're going to have to look at benefits, and these things are dependent upon how much, what action they took could be fairly substantial changes, and things like the 100% employee contribution and the 50% dependent contribution would probably be things that they would have to look at. The hope is that we go in, we say, hey, we're fine where we are. We don't need any extra money. And like they have said the last 3 or 4 biennia, they say, that's great. We're happy to put you in at 2019 funding levels and let you move on down the road. And we can just focus on pension funding. That's our hope. But as y'all know, things change during the legislative session. So that's just something to be aware of, that while we're going to try to focus on pension funding this session, healthcare may come into play and may be something that we have to talk about. With that, I'll turn it over to questions, Ann, and just respond until y'all give me the hook and tell me you're ready to go eat lunch.
I have a question. Porter,
yes.
I have, at what point does our state of Texas credit rating drop because of our pension? Do you all have numbers on that?
We've talked to the comptroller quite a bit about this, and the credit rating agencies look at the entire book of debt for the state, and the state's been obviously very good on its general obligation debt and managing that, and being pretty prudent as it relates to that. As it relates to the teacher retirement system, which is while our unfunded liability is $13 billion, the teacher retirement system unfunded liability is somewhere in the 40 or 50 billion range. And so they put together a plan to manage that debt. So that credit rating agencies will look at that very favorably. While our debt is somewhat smaller, I have made sure to let the comptroller and the legislators know that it's probably a little more problematic in that we aren't on a path to pay off that debt ever. We're on a path to running out of money. That means, actually having to sell off our stocks and our bonds in order to make annuity payments, and selling off our alternative investments, and eventually having no investment income at all, and just having to be on a pay-as-you-go basis, which would be very expensive, very inefficient. And so I think the credit rating agencies are going to look at that, and they've commented about that. But again, they look at the credit worthiness of the state in aggregate. And while this is significant to us, it's a piece of a much larger pie that the state's actually done a pretty good job on. They've continued to maintain their high credit rating. We've talked to the comptroller's office, if that were to drop from a AAA or whatever we are to a AA, what's the cost for that? And they said that they can calculate it, but I don't have numbers on that at this point.
Porter, this is Ray. Hey,
Thank you.
Yes.
Can I say something right quick? We're
Sure, Ann.
muting, so it will take us a second to unmute because we have a protest outside and there's a lot of horns and commotion going on. So just
Not a
keep the
problem. Not a problem. I'm good.
mute us, but give us a second to unmute. But Ray, go ahead.
Can you hear me? No? Shoot.
Yep, I got you.
Okay. Would you comment just a little bit, Porter, on two things? One is that the legislature has the authority to set the contribution policy toward premiums. All you guys can do really is try to choose your administrators of the health plan and, of course, tweak benefits, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So, yeah. Then we really on the healthcare side, board does have much broader latitude to adjust benefits than it does on the pension side. But yes, you're right. The contribution strategy is set in the Appropriations Act and through the legislative budgeting process.
And I guess the second point is just to remind people that even, I mean, they hear the figure all funds will, with sales tax revenues going down as much as they have already, the general revenue hit, I mean, the general revenue request could end up itself being close to $1 billion. And that's a direct correlation to how much sales tax revenue is available. So.
Yeah, I mean, we on the pensions. Oh, you're on the on the pension side. We our board controls, the ERS board controls precious few of the strings as it relates to the pension fund. Of course, no authority over contribution strategy for active members, agencies, or the state, and no control over the benefit structure. Really either. The only, they're working hard to make sure that we have the right asset allocation, that we're doing the best that we can to manage our need to pay annuities with our need to try to earn as large a return in the market as we can. And so we had a pretty robust conversation with the board. The board did last May when they were, last month when they were talking about returns and asset allocation. Trying to balance those things. So that's really where the ERS Board of Trustees has its most plays its most important role, is figuring out how they're going to allocate the money that we have into investments that hopefully get the highest return that we can get. But again, you got to be reasonable in it, because while you can assume that you're going to get anything you want to in the market, as our actuaries like to say, you don't pay benefits with assumptions, you pay them with cash. And so if you assume you're going to get 8 or 9 or 10%, but you only get 7%, you only have the money that was generated from the contributions and a 7% return on those to pay benefits. So that's really our board's goal, is to make sure that they're getting the right asset allocation. But you're right, it's going to be a tight budget session. There's no question. $1 billion ask for the biennium in this legislative session is going to be, I'm not going to say impossible, but I will say, close to impossible. Numbers that I'm starting to hear are a budget shortfall in the $20 to $25 billion range, which, is when you look at 2003, they managed a $10 billion or $3 billion budget. 10 billion, I think it was actually, at 11, it was closer to 20. So they've been able to manage these before, but it's a different budget altogether. So that's why we think it's important to say, you need to put together a plan, and the plan can be phased so that you can phase that plan in over 2 or 3 biennia, where you take the state's contribution that is currently at 19.5% and walk it up a percentage or 2, every couple of years until you're at that ultimate contribution that's needed, which is closer to, 24%, I think, 25%. So You know, you can start phasing into that, but you got to start doing something now, and you got to commit to a plan and stick to the plan. So you can't deviate from that and after a year or two say, yeah, we're good, you know, we're fine. We're not going to do that anymore. You got to start the plan now and stick to it. And once you ultimately phase in to that full contribution rate, you got to keep paying it until you pay off that unfunded liability, which at that point should take, you know, 30 years or so.
Thank you, Porter.
Hey, Porter, this is Ann. I know it goes without saying, but I have to ask anyway. So the prospect of any kind of cost of living increase or 13th check for retirees, is that off the table?
Well, I mean, as my colleague Jennifer says, the barn is burning. You know, to be talking about a cost of living adjustment right now is, while understandable from those who haven't seen one in 20 plus years, the problem is we're running out of money. And so the rule of holes certainly applies here. When you're in one, stop digging. And so we've got to get the most immediate issue taken care of, which is get a plan to pay off the unfunded liability so we don't run out of money to pay benefits in 20 years or 30 years or so. That's going to be really problematic when we can't pay benefits with assets and we've got to go on a pay-as-you-go basis. The likelihood of a cost of living adjustment for anybody at any point ever is really zero at that point. So getting a plan has got to be the first thing to pay off the unfunded liability and get a plan to pay out. Once you start getting committed to that and we start working down, then you can start talking about, well, how adequate are the and reasonable are the benefits that we're paying to retirees who haven't seen a cost of living adjustment. But as you know, Ann, as I know this group is very aware, the benefits that we paid for as active employees, the benefits that we contributed to as employees and that the state contributed to did not have the promise of a cost of living adjustment in it. It wasn't pre-funded. It wasn't factored into any of the benefits that we were promised. That's not to say they haven't been able to happen in the past, because they have. But that's not really part of the defined benefit that we've got. And so our message, once we actually get the plan back to sound, and I'm confident that someday we'll be back to sound, would be that if you were to provide, to tell the legislature that if they were to provide a cost of living adjustment of some sort, they've got to pre-fund it. They've got to pre-fund it. They can't just say they want to give it and then hope that we're able to fund it based on return assumptions or based on returns, excess returns that we might get. It's just not the environment that we're in anymore. And so it's very different. And so we would have to look at a pre-funding, which is actually what they did, I think, for the teacher retirement system this last session was get their plan back to sound, and then they pre-funded a cost of living adjustment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You have Jennifer on the line. So Jennifer, is there anything you want to add? We don't want to leave you out.
Oh, she got to go find her phone to unmute herself, probably.
No, I'm in the midst of a construction zone, so I had to stop the constructing for just a second. But I don't have anything. Thanks for asking.
She's out in rural Flatonia or someplace like that. So,
Okay. Did we have any questions online?
No questions.
No?
And I had one question for Porter. Hi, Porter. Tim Fitzpatrick with TDCJ.
yes.
A couple of my staff have asked me about LECOS and how that works, and I haven't really been able to give them the correct or a great explanation of how that works for them down the road when they do retire. Could you give me a brief overview of how I could explain that better to them?
Yeah, I mean, you know what, I think that the easiest way to think about this is that 80%, actually slightly more than 80%, about 81% of their benefits when they retire come from the main ERS fund. So they will get, you know, their 2.3 multiplier there, and that's where the majority of their benefits come from. The law enforcement custodial officer supplemental retirement fund provides about a 19% increase to those benefits for them. It's an additional contribution that the state's making there, that those participants are making, and there is an additional multiplier that goes with that provides, again, a supplemental benefit to the main ERS fund. So it's probably easier to think about them existing in kind of two funds: the main ERS fund, where they get, we'll just call it 80% of their benefit, and then this supplemental retirement fund where they get a bonus benefit of about 20% to sort of in consideration for the really challenging and dangerous work that they do and how stressful that is. And so they're eligible to retire a little earlier and get a slightly larger benefit because of that, those two funds kind of working in concert. Both of those funds have their own actuarial calculations and depletion dates. If you went back to the third slide or so, I think it is, you'll see that the LECO fund is actually set to run out of money in 2041. Again, that's based on the earlier retirement dates for those folks, the added benefits, the contribution rates that are provided in there. So the challenge is that some people see a number like this and say, well, we really value our law enforcement custodial officers a lot, and we really want to make sure that we take care of them. So let's go take care of the law enforcement custodial officer supplemental retirement fund first, because look, clearly it's in worse shape. We should do that. Except for the fact that that's, again, kind of the little backwards, because 80% of the benefits that those folks are getting are actually in the main ERS fund. So you really got to take care of that main fund first. The good news is the law enforcement officers fund is a smaller fund. The financial need for it is scaled smaller. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. Jennifer May, yeah, she doesn't. I'll get them to y'all, but in order to kind of avoid sort of the bright shiny object that says, oh, well, we can deal with this, you know, $100 million issue over here with law enforcement, and then we'll deal with the $1 billion issue later. We really try not to talk about it, because you'll see that sometimes where legislators will say, well, let's just deal with the law enforcement fund. That seems a lot cheaper and a lot more manageable, and it seems to be in worse shape. Well, it's true, but again, it's just that represents just a small piece of the overall benefits that those employees will get. So we've got to really keep our eye on the main prize, which is the 80% benefit for those folks in the main ERS fund.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Porter, this is Stephanie DeWitt at TxDOT in San Angelo. Thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, good to see you.
I had just wanted to pass on some kudos to your staff. I've had two people request retirement in the last month, and they both said it was just so easy. They got through to customer service easy, even in the midst of everything going on. And I guess your staff is still working at home. And anyway, they were just impressed. I just wanted to pass that on.
Thanks, Stephanie. I appreciate that. Yes, you know, I mean, it's pretty amazing that you can take a 400-person agency that, you know, had really, you know, some small part had worked remotely, and move them 95% to remote work over the course of 10 days and maintain the level of customer service that we certainly expect of ourselves, and we know that our members and retirees expect. And so it's been a real credit to the team to be able to deliver that. I think we've talked to at least some of your leadership within TPEA about some of the challenges we were having before COVID with sort of wait times at our contact center. We're continuing to try to manage that and put together a plan. We talked about that actually at our board meeting in May, what we're doing. Once COVID hit, we actually saw a pretty substantial reduction in call volume. We're still seeing that. It's summer enrollment, however, so a lot of folks we've seen call volume kind of go up. end of the fiscal year. People are starting to think about retirement maybe. And so we're seeing call volume sort of normalize. So I'm glad to hear that folks are able to get in and getting the level of service that we expect of ourselves.
I don't think the call-in line for benefit coordinators is back up yet where we can call in. You know, I think
we've talked about that. I think that's right. We're trying to.
It's
make
a
sure that,
IT support problem. It's not supported by that same system. So,
okay.
yeah, sorry.
thanks, Jennifer.
But I think email, I think they're pretty good about trying to watch those emails as they come through, knowing that that line isn't working. So, sorry, Porter. I just needed to say something when they weren't.
Yeah. Yeah, I've emailed BCSIS a couple of times, and yeah, I got an answer really pretty quick, so I appreciate it.
Good.
Porter, one more question. I promise only one more from me. Would you talk briefly about the change for the purposes of the Medicare retirees that are on board? Talk about the change in the administrator and how that should be a fairly seamless transition. But anyway, I'll let you.
Yeah, so the board, we've had a Medicare Advantage plan that's been administered by Humana since probably Ann can talk to this more than I can, since the advent of our Medicare Advantage plan. I think Humana has been the administrator, and they've done a great job. Our retirees have been very pleased with Medicare Advantage after some initial trepidation with it. I think folks really appreciate the Medicare Advantage plan, and feedback that I've gotten has been mostly unanimous or completely positive. Of course, we have to go out for a bid by law regularly every 6 years on that plan, and so we did. Board awarded a contract at the May board meeting to a new administrator. So we'll be moving on January 1st from Humana to United Healthcare. It's actually a subsidiary of United called Sierra, but doing business really under the United umbrella. And so, but you're right, Ray, unlike with Health Select and the sort of the movement from Blue Cross to United back to Blue Cross and the networks that are different between those two third-party administrators, the Medicare Advantage plan, while the provider brings a network, as long as a provider accepts Medicare, whether or not they are in network of the administrator or not is really irrelevant. So while we are moving to United, as long as one of our participants are seeing a Medicare provider, someone who accepts Medicare, there really should be no difference. So the networks may change a little bit, but again, just like in the past, as long as you're seeing a Medicare a provider that accepts Medicare, the network really doesn't matter to you. And many of the added benefits like Silver Sneakers that I hear from a lot of people that they really like their Silver Sneakers benefits, this same the benefit is available with the new administrator with United. So Silver Sneakers will continue to be available. A lot of those additional benefits that folks use and appreciate should all be. That's not to say that there won't be some hiccups along the way. We know when we transition from one provider to another that there's always a little something that goes on. We want to make sure that that's minimized, and if folks experience any of that, we need to hear about it so that we can address it. But hopefully this will be seamless and completely opaque. You won't notice it. It'll be behind the scenes, and you can just sort of keep moving along.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all the questions. Thank you, Porter and
Yeah,
Jennifer.
thanks.
Yes. Appreciate
Thanks.
you.
Thanks to y'all. Thanks for all you do and have done. And if anybody ever needs anything, don't hesitate to reach out.